Hello, brothers and sisters. This is Daniel Canepa. This is in honor of the truth. Today, we're going to be continuing the topic of false brothers. Last time we talked about false teachers and how to detect them. And today, we're going to continue on this trajectory about falseness in the church. And I do believe that this might be the last teaching for now about this topic. And we're going to concentrate on the hireling. Not necessarily like a false teacher like last time. I do believe that was clear on detecting false teachers, modern false teachers, and what has to do relevant to what is going on today, these days. So welcome, and I hope that is a blessing for you, and especially those who are pastors, those who are leaders, those who have a congregation, those who you know that God has called you to lead sheep, to help the sheep, to minister to sheep, to guide the sheep towards the Lord and to take care of them, more especially to pastors, bishops, and those who are ministers of God who are taking care of the sheep. This is especially for you and those who you know in your heart that God is calling you for that. Not because any man gave you a title, but because God just put it in your heart, and the experiences that He's led you past is the experiences of a leader, those who suffer for the good of the sheep. So this is for you. Let's go ahead and begin in John chapter 10. So in John chapter 10, it talks about the hireling. Starting from verse 11, it says, I am the good shepherd. The good shepherd gives his life for the sheep. But the hireling, he who is not the shepherd, one who does not own the sheep, sees the wolf coming and leaves the sheep and flees. And the wolf catches the sheep and scatters them. The hireling flees because he's a hireling and does not care about the sheep. So first, I want to mention really quick. So the hireling, it mentions the hireling, but the wolf is what we mentioned last time. The false teachers, false prophets, that's what we mentioned last time. And I just want to do a brief parenthesis on that, just so we can get it out of the way. Let's go to Matthew chapter 7, where it mentions this, just to not get mixed up between the wolf and the hireling. So Matthew chapter 7, verse 15 says, beware of false prophets who come to you in sheep's clothing, but inwardly they are ravenous wolves. You will know them by their fruit. And then another testimony in Acts chapter 20, starting from verse 28, says, therefore take heed to yourselves and to all the flock among which the Holy Spirit has made you overseers, to shepherd a church of God, which He purchased with His own blood. For I know this, that after my departure, savage wolves will come in among you, not sparing the flock. Also, from among yourselves, men will rise up, speaking perverse things, to draw away the disciples after themselves. So the savage wolves, they are the false teachers. They are the false prophets that are sometimes among you. But today we want to talk about the hireling. So who is the hireling? If these are the false teachers, the wolves, then who is the hireling? Well, first we do have to see where the hireling comes from, how it's born, how he's made, the beginnings of a hireling. And for that, I do want to bring the board here just to draw. So there is a flock first. There's a group. There's a shepherd. And we are going to go to the example of the Lord and the group that He had close to Him and how that worked. So we see how this actually connects to our lives. So let's go to Matthew chapter 17. Matthew chapter 17, because God had people who were close to Him, and He had other people who were even closer to Him. This is the way it was. So chapter 17, verse 1 says in Matthew, now after 6 days, Jesus took Peter, James, and John, His brother, led them up on a high mountain by themselves, and He was transfigured before them. His face shone like the sun. Second example we have in Mark chapter 5. In Mark chapter 5, verse 37, in the house of Jairus, where his daughter was dead and was resurrected, This was a very powerful miracle. So the Lord only took a few, and he permitted no one to follow him except Peter, James, and John, the brother of James. So same thing. Since it was a more intimate meeting, he had 3. So we have that example, and I want to draw that. So the Good Shepherd, he had 3 that were most closest to him, and he had trust in them to see things that were more intimate, like the transfiguration, like this miracle with this girl who was resurrected. And then in a larger circle, there's the rest of the disciples. So 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, and 12. That's the example the Lord gave us. But there's an even bigger circle. For example, in Acts, the book of Acts, chapter 1, verse 14 says, "These all continue with one accord in prayer and supplication with the woman and Mary, the mother of Jesus, and with his brothers. And in those days Peter stood up in the midst of the disciples. Altogether the number of names was about 120. So about 120 men. And this is the largest circle in the congregation. So let's just pretend that there's 120 right here. Okay, so 120, the largest circle. And this is a circle of trust. The Lord gave us a perfect example of the circle of trust that a shepherd, that a pastor, that a minister, a leader of God has. So God he raises apostles, he raises prophets, he raises pastors and teachers to edify his church. He uses vessels to do this. God uses them to edify his church, to give them spiritual milk so they may grow. And we see that in 1 Peter. Let's go to 1 Peter chapter 2. Starting from verse 2 says, "As newborn babes desire the pure milk of the word, that you may grow thereby. If indeed you have tasted that the Lord is gracious, coming to him as to a living stone, rejected indeed by men, but chosen by God and precious. You also, as living stones, are being built up a spiritual house, a holy priesthood, to offer up spiritual sacrifices acceptable to God through Jesus Christ." So we have a congregation here who is being edified, drinking the spiritual milk to grow together in one accord, one mind, one heart, the same doctrine, the sound doctrine of Jesus Christ. And what begins to happen? So let's start the process of the hireling. What starts to happen? Let's go to verse 1 here of chapter 2, right before. It says, "Therefore, laying aside all malice, all deceit, hypocrisy, envy, and all evil speaking." So how does a hireling start? Well, it starts with somebody close to you. Kind of like Judas. Somebody close to you will not let go of malice, will not let go of evil speaking, hypocrisy, envy, especially envy. Resentment is a big one. So one of them turns into a hireling in his heart. He is a hireling. And sometimes it can actually happen to one even closer. The example that the Lord gave us was one of the 12, but it's not impossible for one of the 3 also to happen. So that is how a hireling starts in his heart. He doesn't let go of these things. So we're going to go ahead and see an example of the process of, this is the beginning, how it starts, but now we're going to see the entire process. And I couldn't find any better example than Absalom, the son of David. So let's go to 2 Samuel chapter 15. There's a very good example of the entire process of how a hireling grows up and into a hireling and would fully manifested to be a hireling. Let's begin in verse 1. This is Absalom. And we're going to see the key points of a hireling. Okay, so chapter 15 says, after this, it happened that Absalom provided himself with chariots and horses and 50 men to run before him. So what happens? Here, you are entrusted. So you entrust, you as a leader, you have people you trust. This is a circle of trust. So in their heart, they already have malice. You might have seen it, you might have not seen it, but the thing is, they have malice. They are entrusted, like Judas, he was entrusted the money bag. He was a treasurer, he was entrusted the money bag. So they're going to be entrusted things close to you, just like Absalom. Verse 2 says, now Absalom would rise early and stand beside the way of the gate. So it was, whenever anyone who had a lawsuit came to the king for a decision, that Absalom would call to him and say, what city are you from? And he would say, your servant is from such and such a tribe of Israel. Then Absalom would say to him, look, your case is good and right, but there is no deputy of the king to hear you. Moreover, Absalom would say, oh, that I were made judge in the land, and everyone who has any suit or cause would come to me, then I would give him justice. And so it was that whenever anyone came near to bow down to him, that he would put out his hand and take him and kiss him. In this manner, Absalom acted towards all Israel who came to the king for judgment. So Absalom stole the hearts of the men of Israel. So he begins to win favor in the hearts of the people, of the congregation, win favors. Since he's close to the king, close to that leader, close to that minister, he has knowledge that he's been imparted, wisdom, teachings, even teachings. And you'll see sometimes they start to repeat the same teachings. They repeat the teachings and they win favor in their eyes of the people. And why do they do this? Because in their heart, they already are devising a plan. And in order for this plan to give fruit, they have to some way retain the maximum amount of contacts possible when they're still in here. So they have to win contacts, win brethren to their side, to have favor, just like Absalom did it in a sneaky and a malicious way. And they start doing this in a malicious way, and they know it. Sometimes they know it, that they're doing things behind your back, but they'll do it anyways. So let's continue to verse 7. Now it came to pass after 40 years that Absalom said to the king, please let me go to Hebron and pay the vow which I have made to the Lord. For your servant took a vow while I dwelt in Geshur in Syria, saying, if the Lord indeed brings me back to Jerusalem, then I will serve the Lord. And the king said to him, go in peace. So he arose and went to Hebron. So what happens? Eventually, for some reason, the hireling will get out of the congregation, start his own thing. For some reason, it could be a good reason, it could be a bad reason. But the thing is that the leader, you as the minister, will not really have any evil thoughts towards him. You'll just see, okay, well, he's doing this. Just like David, he didn't know what was happening. So same thing, because for the pure, all things are pure. But for the evil, all things are evil. So you have pure thoughts. You wouldn't think that he's going to betray you. You wouldn't think that he's going to do bad things behind your back. You just send him off, okay? That's fine. Now let's go to verse 10. It says, then Absalom sent spies throughout all the tribes of Israel, saying, as soon as you hear the sound of the trumpet, then you shall say, Absalom reigns in Hebron. So what happens? He starts devising a plan. So he starts devising a plan. He already has a plan to have his little circle. Doesn't have it yet, but he already has favor here. So he has a plan. And then he has more plans and more plans. So God sees our heart. And even though they haven't really started in that work, they already have the plan in their heart. It is not from God. Verse 11, and with Absalom went 200 men invited from Jerusalem, and they went along innocently and did not know anything. So you have fluctuating sheep, fluctuating in their heart. They're lacking understanding. They're lacking understanding. And what happens? Well, the hireling went there. He started his own plan. And since he won favor here, he'll get one of these. And innocently, they start congregating with him, listening to him, because their heart was stolen. And then little by little, he might get another one from here. And then he'll get a lot from here. Or maybe just a few, I don't know. And there you go. That's what happens. Innocently. They don't know any better. They don't know what he's doing. Let's go now to verse 12. Then Absalom sent for Ahithophel, the Gilonite, David's counselor, and from the city from Giloth, while he offered sacrifices. And the conspiracy grew strong, for the people with Absalom continually increased in number. So they started increasing. But what happened? This man, Ahithophel, he was a counselor of David's. So he might have been somebody close like him. But sometimes, like I said, it could be somebody even closer. It could be one of these. So it could be one of these that, let's say this was a hireling. It could be one of these that goes and turns into the close one here. The counselor of David. That can happen too. And we just can't be surprised. And what happens? Well, now that he had his plan, now he's starting to execute his plan. He has people there listening. But they're still here too. They're like in both sides. They're not really sure because they're fluctuating. They don't know what's going on. And eventually, the hireling will start subtly saying bad things about the pastor. How do I know this? Because it's happened to us. I've seen it happen to us, to my father, and I see that if it happened to the Lord, it's going to happen to us. It's going to happen to you because we're not better than him. It's going to happen. He gave us an example. So, we also have the example of David, his own son. So what starts to happen? They start to talk bad about the leader, but in a subtle way, because I've seen this happen quite a few times when the person that turns into the hireling, they'll say, oh man, we love you. I love you guys. You guys are great. You teach the word of God. And all these beautiful words. And I've seen these people say this to my face, but I know that what they're doing, I could tell how their heart was. God, for some reason, gave me that by his mercy, let me understand how their heart was. And I could see through their smiles and those words what they were really planning. And they say this, but behind your back, they're going to start saying, no, don't listen to him. He's having lordship over the sheep. He's doing too much. He has some errors in his teachings. This teaching, that teaching, there's an error here, there's an error there. He doesn't have all the truth. You know what? And it's little, very subtle. So they're like, oh, okay. The sheep, okay. So this is wrong, that's wrong. Yeah, I saw him. I saw that too. Yeah, I saw that too. And then they start, since he already won favor, now they trust him and they stay there. And now they're gone completely. There's no more connection. They're there. They've been deceived. So next is, the last verse I want to mention, 13. Verse 13 says, now a messenger came to David saying, the hearts of the men of Israel are with Absalom. That's the last thing that happens. So what does that mean? After all the nice words, all the nice things said, but those subtle messages to those sheep, they launch an attack. So the hireling will launch a direct attack, a public attack. So he'll make it known that he's against you. He'll make it public that he's against your teachings. And this has happened, and it does happen. Judas made it public. And I believe there's even an epistle of Judas. I haven't read it. I don't know if it's real or not, but all I know is that he blames Jesus for what happened. So there you go. You see how his heart, he made a public statement. Maybe he wrote it, maybe not. But if he did write it, it makes sense. It makes sense to me why I just read the synopsis. I just read the summary of it. But it makes sense that he will write that because of how his heart was. He said something publicly that it was. I don't recommend that you read that. But to me, it made sense seeing how wicked his heart was. Same thing, he'll make a public statement. He'll make videos against you. Things like that. So he'll launch the attack and make it public. Make it known what his true intentions were. God knows the intent of the heart. We can't hide anything from him. But eventually, when you get to this point and the hireling is bold enough, he's like, okay, I got my own thing going now. Now I can really lift that, we can lift that veil and I can show my true colors. That's what they do. All right, so all this sounds very negative. I know, this sounds bad, but there is a solution. There is a solution, and I really do want to emphasize this. There are two ways to resolve this. There's two ways to resolve this. One is avoiding, and two is letting him do it. Okay, so first we're going to talk about the first solution was avoiding. Let's go to Galatians. Galatians chapter 6, verse 1. It says, brethren, if any man is overtaken in any trespass, you who are spiritual, restore such a one in a spirit of gentleness, considering yourself lest you also be tempted. Second testimony, let's go to 2 Corinthians chapter 2, verse 5. It says, but if anyone has caused grief, he has not grieved me, but all of you to some extent. Not to be too severe. This punishment which was inflicted by the majority is sufficient for such a man. To that, on the contrary, you ought rather to forgive and comfort him, lest for have such a one be swallowed up with too much sorrow. Therefore, I urge you to reaffirm your love to him. For to this end I also wrote, that I might put you to the test, whether you are obedient in all things. Now whom you forgive anything, I also forgive. For indeed, if indeed I have forgiven anything, I have forgiven that one for your sakes in the presence of Christ, lest Satan should take advantage of us, for we are not ignorant of his devices. What does that mean? That means you saw that brother. So avoiding means you avoid all this. So while he's still here, you see this in his heart. You see that he's been swallowed up in sorrow because he's been exhorted. Or you see that he's swallowed up in envy, jealousy, evil speaking. So you start noticing this and you start finding a way to avoid it from happening. See, the Lord gave us his word in order to use us as vessels so that he might have mercy and reach one while he's doubting in his heart and preparing these malicious plans. Let's go to another testimony, 1 Corinthians chapter 6, verse 7 says, now therefore, it is already an utter failure for you that you go to law against one another. Why do you not rather accept wrong? Why do you not rather let yourself be cheated? So if you haven't watched the teaching I've made of forged weapons, I recommend you watch it. There I teach about specifically this. If your brother has he has some kind of grudge, resentment against you for offending him or supposedly offending him, even if you know you're right, you have to talk to him. Why don't you suffer instead to be cheated? Let him be right. Let him be right for a moment. You already talked about it. Okay, I offended you. What did I do? Okay, I did that. You know what? I'm sorry for doing that. I'm sorry for doing that, okay? Are we good now? And you move on. Instead of you wanting to be right because you know you're right. No, I'm right. This guy's wrong. I'm not going to accept that. Sometimes why don't you rather let yourself be cheated? Why don't you rather accept the wrong and avoid this? God can use you to avoid this. Let's go to another example, Romans 12. Romans 12, verse 20 says, therefore, if your enemy is hungry, feed him. If he is thirsty, give him a drink. For in so doing, you will heap coals of fire on his head. Do not be overcome by evil, but overcome evil with good. So don't be overcome by evil, overcome it with good. So if he has something against you and he is accusing you of something, instead of returning with the same tone, with the same evil, change it up a little bit and return that with good. Ask for forgiveness. Okay, I did this to you. Well, I beg your forgiveness. Forgive me. And then just start restoring that brother who has that resentment, who has that evil thoughts growing in his heart. And you'll see it and you'll be made aware of it. God will make you become aware of these evil intentions, that evil root in his heart. What are you going to do about it? Avoid it. You can do it. God's giving you the necessary information, the necessary tools to help avoid that person from becoming a hireling. So let's say you couldn't avoid it. He already became a hireling. He's already doing all this and he already did this. What do we do then? Well, let's go to the verse before. Romans 12, verse 19 says, "Beloved, do not avenge yourselves, but rather give place to wrath. For it is written, vengeance is mine, I will repay, says the Lord." And let's go another testimony, Matthew chapter 15. Matthew 15, verse 14 says, "Let them alone. They are blind, leaders of fluctuating sheep who were not faithful. And if the blind leads the blind, both will fall into a ditch," or the pit. So let them. Once they become a hireling, fully manifested to be a hireling, I have done this already, you can't do anything. It's too late. You didn't avoid it. Now maybe it's not your fault. Maybe God just intended for this to happen, for that person to turn into a hireling so that it could be manifested their true intentions of their heart, just like Judas. And it could be manifested the intentions and betrayal of these. Maybe he let it happen. God does make the destructor in order to destroy. He does cause this to happen sometimes because of their heart. And he has to use somebody to show that people have evil intentions and they're not faithful to the overseers, to the one that God put over them. Not to a man necessarily, but true love, that you have for one another. And that's how you know that you're disciples of Christ, that you have love for one another. If you don't have love, then you start doing these things. So this message and this teaching is for you ministers, for you pastors, for you leaders, and for you who God has called you to be an overseer some way or another, but maybe that hasn't manifested in your life yet, but because of your experiences, because of things that have happened to you, that you have a heart and a love for taking care of the sheep, and you know it deep down inside. You know it. This message is for you. Avoid this by any means. But if you can't avoid it and it manifests, then let it. Don't take vengeance. If they do something publicly against you, do nothing. There's nothing you can do about it. Leave it in God's hands and pray about it. Say, Lord, I detach myself from this brother, from this man. I'm sorry. He is now in your hands. I unbind myself. I unbind myself. I detach myself. I disconnect myself from this person and I place him in your hands. That way you wash your hands of this. And if it gets to that point, it is sad. It happens. It happened to the Lord, and it will happen to you if you truly, truly are an overseer. Eventually it happens. And this message is to prepare you so that your heart is not stricken with sorrow and that you are changed into a cold man, a cold person because of that betrayal, because of that. Prepare your heart. It eventually happens. But if it can be avoided, that's preferable. Okay, brothers and sisters, I hope this has been a blessing for you. And there's a lot to talk about, but there's a lot of deception in these days, and there's a lot of false brothers. But this has been the last teaching on this topic, so we're going to go ahead and move on after this. And I really do pray, and I really do hope that you who are being called, you can save those. You can help those who are overtaken with grudge, overtaken with bitterness, overtaken with even envy, jealousy. You can detect it because God has given you the tools in order to detect it so you can do something about it and do it with love. He is a God of reconciliation. So use those tools of reconciliation that's been placed in you to restore that brother. God bless you.